A warm welcome to all our viewers. I'm your host, Shivangi Mishra, and you're watching another episode of South Asia Focus. Let's begin the show. As Bangladesh moves toward national elections, political violence, street unrest, and attacks on institutions are escalating. The death of youth leader and election candidate Sharif Osman Hadi has sparked widespread protests, vandalism of media houses, and heightened security in capital Dhaka. The interim administration led by Muhammad Yunus is facing growing criticism for failing to restore order in the country since the ousting of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. A report.
Bangladesh is sliding deeper into crisis as political uncertainty, economic strain, street violence, and communal tensions intensify ahead of national elections. The killing of youth leader and election candidate Sharif Osman Hadi during a campaign in Dhaka triggered violent protests, attacks on leading media houses, and heightened security across the capital.
The miscreants, steered the anger to demolish newspapers. They attacked us, and our journalists were scared to death, so they had to flee the office.
The unrest has unfolded under the interim administration led by Muhammad Yunus, formed after former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina fled the country in August 2024. Clashes near the Indian High Commission and rising diplomatic tensions have added to the volatility, with analysts warning the turmoil appears orchestrated rather than spontaneous.
If someone says that this was a spontaneous reaction, of course it wasn't. This man was unwell, or after he was shot, or whatever has happened to him for a while, and there was no response from the public at large. But for the last couple of days, we have seen several members of the Yunus regime, including the former minister, Mr. Mahfouz, and others, have come out in public and called for blood and dead bodies. So there you go. I mean, that's what you have. When you call for blood and dead bodies to the jihadi crowd, they're going to go out there and aim for that.
To counter this lack of popularity of the Jamaat-e-Islami, they're trying to whip up all kinds of frenzies. First frenzy they tried to whip up was against Sheikh Hasina. That did not work at all. Now what they have done is that as part of the election campaign, one of their people was shot at, Osman Hadi. Within seconds of that shooting, they're trying to blame India. Without any inquiry, nothing. They called in our High Commissioner and telling him that, you have done this and so on. This is absolutely infuriating. And this is part of the methodology that Muhammad Yunus has been following to be completely anti-Indian.
The unrest in Bangladesh has taken a darker turn, with violence now spilling into cultural spaces and minority communities. Amid anti-India protests, reports of brutal attacks on Hindus have surfaced. In Mymensingh, a Hindu man, Deepu Chandra Das, was lynched over alleged blasphemy and his body burned, an act that starkly exposes the country's growing lawlessness. Analysts warn such mob violence, increasingly weaponized for political and religious ends, signals a dangerous pattern of targeting minorities and dissent, deepening instability in an already fragile nation.
During the regime time occupation, within 1 minute of Sheikh Hasina leaving the country, they had started the attacks on the Hindu minorities. The killings, the lynching, the rape, destroying their property, destroying their businesses. Same thing is happening now. Yesterday, in a district, in Mymensingh district, and in an area not very far from Dhaka, a young 30-year-old Hindu on a fake charge of blasphemy or something, he was beaten to death, and then his body was put on a stick and burnt. Now, what kind of a society is this? Is this 21st century? Is this civilization? You're going back to barbarism. Now, this must be called out.
In India, hundreds of indigenous youths and students protested outside the Bangladesh Deputy High Commission in Agartala, condemning threats and inflammatory rhetoric from Dhaka. The unrest has spilled across borders, heightening diplomatic tensions and raising serious questions about Bangladesh's governance and commitment to human rights. As elections approach, the country stands at a dangerous crossroads with political violence, communal unrest, and diplomatic strain threatening stability, democracy, and minority rights across the region.
Moving on. India's global diplomacy gains momentum as Prime Minister Narendra Modi's three-nation tour to Jordan, Ethiopia and Oman delivers tangible outcomes. The visit strengthened trade, expanded clean energy and digital cooperation, and deepened development partnerships, reinforcing India's role as a trusted partner and a leading voice of the global South committed to shared prosperity and sustainable growth. Take a look. Indian diplomacy is expanding its global footprint, strengthening partnerships in trade, technology and development through proactive leadership. This momentum was reflected in Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent three-nation tour to Jordan, Ethiopia and Oman. In Jordan, the visit focused on deepening bilateral ties and marking key diplomatic milestones. Leaders highlighted strong trade relations, with bilateral trade reaching $2.3 billion in 2024 and India emerging as Jordan's third largest trading partner. Both sides agreed to diversify the trade basket and convene the 11th Trade and Economic Joint Committee in the first half of 2026 to explore new avenues of cooperation. The discussions also expanded to digital technology and education, with an emphasis on capacity building, institutional collaboration, and the adoption of transformative digital solutions.
Solar, wind, ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन, एनर्जी स्टोरेज, इसमें भारत बहुत बड़ी इन्वेस्टर के रूप में काम कर रहा है। जॉर्डन के पास भी बहुत बड़ा पोटेंशियल है जिसे हम अनलॉक कर सकते हैं। ऐसे ही ऑटोमोबाइल और मोबिलिटी का सेक्टर है। भारत आज अफोर्डेबल ईवीज, टू व्हीलर्स और सीएनजी मोबिलिटी सॉल्यूशंस में दुनिया के टॉप देशों में से एक है। इस क्षेत्र में भी हमें ज्यादा से ज्यादा काम मिलकर करना चाहिए।
In Ethiopia, Prime Minister Modi held wide-ranging talks with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali, reviewing the expanding India-Ethiopia partnership across trade and investment, innovation and technology, education, capacity building and defense cooperation. India also reaffirmed its commitment to deepen collaboration in health security, digital health and traditional medicine, underscoring its role not just as a trade partner but as a catalyst for sustainable development and job creation in Ethiopia.
We know the public-private partnership is very essential, and it's known that the second largest investors in Ethiopia are Indian private sectors or investors. So this significantly creates more than 73,000 jobs for Ethiopians. And it's they have been also investing more than $5 billion. So it means that it is contributing for the development of the country.
The final leg of Prime Minister Modi's three-nation tour brought him to Oman, where he received a warm welcome from Sultan Haytham bin Tariq at Al Baraka Palace in Muscat. The visit coincided with 70 years of India-Oman diplomatic relations, marking a legacy of trust, strong people-to-people ties and deepening economic cooperation. During their bilateral meeting, both leaders reaffirmed their commitment to expanding strategic and economic engagement. A key highlight of the visit was the signing of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, set to reduce trade barriers, boost investment, and strengthen India's long-term economic presence in West Asia.
The CEPA agreement is one of the important agreements for us, as well as other international agreements, where it opens up a dialogue and an avenue for exchange of trade and investment between the nations and further collaboration in different aspects. One of the key aspects that we are after is export development. So throughout this agreement we will be able to import and export different goods and services from different origins to different markets.
From strengthening economic engagement in Jordan, advancing development partnerships in Ethiopia to cementing a future-ready trade framework with Oman, Prime Minister Modi's three-nation tour underscores India's proactive, confident and forward-looking diplomacy. By deepening cooperation in clean energy, digital innovation, trade and capacity building, India is steadily consolidating its role as a reliable development partner and a credible, influential voice of the Global South. This sustained diplomatic outreach not only enhances India's global stature but also reaffirms its commitment to shared prosperity, mutual respect and a more connected and inclusive world order. Time now for Asia This Week, the stories from across the continent.
Koreans mark the 14th anniversary of leader Kim Jong-sec's death, state media reported. In footage provided by the country's official news agency KCNA, residents and soldiers were seen laying flowers near statues of Kim Jong-second and the state's founder Kim's second son at the Mansu Hill Grand Monument in Pyongyang. KCNA also said that officials, soldiers and students laid flower baskets and bouquets at monuments across the country to mark the anniversary. Dense fog blanketed major motorways across Pakistan's Punjab province, prompting authorities to close several key routes due to severely reduced visibility and increased risk of accidents. Lahore recorded an alarming air quality index of 322 on December 16, earning the city the dubious distinction of being the world's most polluted at that time. Frustration grew among stranded commuters as travel disruptions continued throughout the morning. India summoned Bangladesh's High Commissioner to New Delhi to convey its strong concerns over what it described as a deteriorating security situation in Bangladesh, particularly threats targeting the Indian mission in Dhaka. Ties between the neighbors have become frosty since Hasina fled to Delhi and Dhaka has repeatedly asked for her extradition. Last month, a Bangladesh court sentenced her to death in absentia for her role in a deadly crackdown on the protests.
Afghanistan is entering the harsh winter amid a deepening humanitarian crisis, with millions of people struggling to survive due to widespread poverty, dwindling international aid, and rising hunger. The United Nations World Food Programme warns that, for the first time in decades, it cannot mount an effective winter response, leaving vulnerable families, especially children, at grave risk. A report.
After more than 4 decades of conflict, Afghanistan remains one of the world's poorest and most fragile countries, with much of its population dependent on humanitarian assistance to survive. Years of war have devastated infrastructure, weakened public services, and left millions without stable livelihoods. Since the 2021 withdrawal of US-led forces and the return of the Taliban to power, international assistance has dropped sharply. The loss of foreign aid and development funding has triggered a severe economic downturn, pushing millions of Afghans deeper into poverty and leaving families with few ways to earn a sustainable income. This winter, already difficult living conditions are being further strained by soaring food prices, widespread unemployment, and the lingering effects of drought and earthquakes that have damaged homes, farmland, and water supplies. Many rural communities have seen harvests fail, while urban families struggle to afford even basic staples. For households trying to meet their most basic needs, heating, nutritious food, and healthcare have become impossible luxuries. Parents are often forced to make painful choices between buying food or fuel, delaying medical treatment, or pulling children out of school, decisions that carry long-term consequences, especially for young children and the elderly.
ژمي سختې ده زموږ دپاره خسو وسم نشته چې خس واخلو دا خو ماشومه ده وسم نه کېږي بس همدومره راوړي چې ویې خورو که چا راکړه خو سوځو یا ګنې ناست یو بخارۍ ته ایستم وس نه کېږي.
The United Nations World Food Programme says malnutrition in Afghanistan has reached its highest level in decades, with children suffering the most. Aid workers warn that growing numbers of infants and young children are now severely undernourished, leaving them highly vulnerable to disease. Severe funding cuts have forced the agency to scale back or suspend food assistance to millions of people even as winter temperatures set in and nutritional needs increase. Many families who once relied on regular food support are now being left without help. Child deaths are expected to rise during Afghanistan's winter months, when food is scarcest and access to healthcare becomes more limited. The World Food Programme estimates that 17 million people are currently facing acute hunger, around 3 million more than last year. The crisis has been further intensified by the mass return of Afghans from neighboring Iran and Pakistan under migrant and refugee return programs, adding new pressure to already struggling households and communities.
Soaring malnutrition is now placing the lives of millions of children at risk. We've seen dramatic aid cuts and cuts to food assistance, and the poorest Afghans are now asking themselves, how are we going to make it through the winter? Forced returns of Afghans from neighbouring countries, widespread drought, and a dramatic decline in food assistance across the country have created a devastating hunger crisis now affecting 17 million people.
Without significant and sustained international support, Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis could have long-term consequences for the country's future. Widespread malnutrition and poverty threaten the health, education, and development of an entire generation of children, while economic collapse and displacement make recovery increasingly difficult. Aid groups stress that rebuilding livelihoods, strengthening communities, and restoring access to basic services will be essential if Afghanistan hopes to break the cycle of hunger and instability. Otherwise, millions of Afghans may continue to face uncertainty and hardship for years to come.
Sri Lanka is pressing ahead with its economic recovery after a devastating cyclone struck just as the country was beginning to stabilize from a historic financial crisis. The government says reconstruction spending and renewed foreign investment could help sustain growth above 5% next year, defying IMF projections. With billions of dollars in damage to homes and infrastructure, officials are relying on international aid, budget reallocations, and major investment projects to rebuild and to turn disaster recovery into a driver of long-term economic growth. Take a look.
Sri Lanka, an Indian Ocean island nation of 22 million people, is emerging from one of the most severe economic crises in its history. After defaulting on its debt in 2022 and grappling with shortages of fuel, food and foreign exchange, the country has been slowly stabilizing under an International Monetary Fund bailout program backed by support from global lenders and foreign governments. That fragile recovery is now being shaped by a fresh challenge. In late November, Cyclone Ditwa tore through large parts of the country, killing hundreds of people and affecting about 10% of the population. Homes, roads, railways, farms and tea estates were badly damaged, with reconstruction costs estimated at up to $7 billion. Despite the destruction, Sri Lanka's government says rebuilding efforts could help drive economic growth. Officials expect the economy to expand by more than 5% next year, matching this year's pace and significantly exceeding IMF projections.
Our task is to do the right thing at this moment, bring more and more investment, so maintain this economic trajectory. So as I just highlighted, the 5% growth and will gradually increase by aiming medium-term growth more than 7%. So this is the target line. With regard to Sinopec, almost that is finalized. So we hope we would be able to sign this agreement and commence this project either at end of this month or maybe early next year, 2026. In addition, like the reconstruction, restoration of the infrastructure, railway, transportation, and other basic infrastructure in the education, health, and all those things will also add to the economic growth. Though they are not strategic investment, they are the needy investment at this particular point in time.
Sri Lanka has already secured fresh emergency support to cope up with its worst natural disaster since the 2004 tsunami. The Asian Development Bank has committed $200 million, while the World Bank has pledged $120 million. The IMF is also expected to approve an additional $200 million in emergency funding. To finance rebuilding, the government plans to divert funds from other sectors, tap treasury reserves, and use donor assistance to restore housing, infrastructure, and livelihoods, particularly in agriculture.
500 billion, so that would be a rough estimate that is more than enough to carry out the basic things, execute the basic things, the reconstruction of housing, the roads and infrastructure facilities, and provide certain benefits for those who lost their livelihood, especially agriculture, the farming, and all those things.
As Sri Lanka balances disaster recovery with economic reform, the government hopes reconstruction spending and fresh investment will do more than repair the damage left by Cyclone Titwa. Officials say it could also help reinforce confidence and place the country on a stronger, more sustainable growth path. Looking ahead, Sri Lanka's future will hinge on its ability to maintain reforms while rebuilding from repeated economic and climate shocks. How effectively it manages reconstruction, controls debt, and supports growth will determine whether the country can transform a fragile recovery into a more stable and resilient economy for its people.
From financial collapse to natural disaster, Sri Lanka's test continues. And with that, we come to the end of this week's episode. See you next week. Till then, goodbye and take care.